In this video, I'm going to talk about different layers and structures of the skin. So the first thing that I want you guys to look at is the thick skin versus the thin skin. The thick skin is going to have a much thicker layer of epidermis as compared to the thin skin. So I'm going to go ahead and label them. Here's thick, here's thin. Also, another way to identify them is by the hair follicles. You don't find hair in thick skin. This is the type of skin that you find in the palms of the hand or soles of the feet. And this is the type of skin that you find everywhere else in the body. So we could divide the skin into three different layers. So you have the top layer, which is the epidermis, the middle portion, the dermis, and then the lowest portion, which is the hypodermis, the bottom portion. Now the epidermis right here is made out of stratified squamous epithelium, keratinized, for both thick and thin skin. Now I'm going to use the thick skin to label different layers within the epidermis because it's a little bit bigger and easier to see. So let's look at the epidermis. We could further divide the epidermis into 5 layers of cells. The bottommost layer here is going to be the stratum basale, and this is a single layer of cells at the very bottom of the epidermis that are cube shaped, and these are the germline cells, so they give rise to the cells above. And also you could find different types of cells here. So this is a melanocyte, which produces melanin. This is a Merkel cell, and Merkel cells are involved with light touch. Now moving up, you have the stratum spinosum. Stratum spinosum are the cells above the stratum basale. So this is going to be stratum spinosum. If you pay attention, these cells are not quite flat yet, and you could see the nucleus. Another type of cell that you will be able to find within this layer are these Langerhans cells, which you could actually find anywhere in the skin. Langerhans cells are a type of dendritic cell, and dendritic cells belong to the immune system that are found in the mucosa and in the skin. Now above the stratum spinosum, you're going to see a dark layer. It's going to be a few rows of cells that are going to be darker. These are the stratum granulosum. They're called granulosum because if you pay attention, you could see that these cells are beginning to develop granules, so it appears dark. Above that, you're going to have a clear layer. This is the stratum lucidum. Remember, lucid means clear, and this is a clear layer. Something to keep in mind about stratum lucidum is that it is only found in thick skin. You don't find it in the thin skin. And the layer of cells above that, this is the stratum corneum. If you look at the stratum corneum, the cells are pretty flat at this point. You don't really see a nucleus. They're basically dried cells, and we call them keratinocytes at this point. Something to keep in mind is that everything here in thick skin would be the same for thin skin, except that the stratum lucidum would be missing, but the orders would be the same. So moving down into the dermis, which is the middle portion, we could divide the dermis into two layers. A papillary layer and a reticular layer. In the papillary layer, which is this, everything here in orange, you could find areolar connective tissue. By the way, there's also a papillary layer here in the thin skin, but you can't really see it. I'm just using thick skin because the structures are more obvious here. So each one of these structures, not this one, but the part that is standing up, the part of dermis that is standing up like this, is called a dermal papilla. And papilla in anatomy means nipple. So usually things that sort of look like nipple are called papilla. And this layer is a papillary layer. Now in the papillary layer, you could find these structures here. These are called the Meissner's corpuscles, and I think that they kind of look like sperm cells. Meissner's corpuscles are for detecting light touch. I'm going to label one of them. So those are two things to remember about the papillary layer, is that it's made out of areolar connective tissue, and you also find Meissner's corpuscles there, which are for detecting light touch. These blue and red dots are supposed to represent blood cells. I drew them there so that you guys know that at this point you are going to find blood vessels, nerves, and things like that. Now, in the reticular layer of the dermis, you're going to have dense irregular connective tissue. Remember, dense irregular connective tissue is good for pull from multiple directions, and that's what you're going to find here in this layer. There is a type of corpuscle found in this layer called the Pacinian corpuscle. It's kind of like you could find it in the hypodermis or dermis. And these Pacinian corpuscles look like onions, and they are for detecting pressure. And that's something to remember about the reticular layer, that it's mostly made out of dense irregular connective tissue, and that you could find Pacinian corpuscles here, which are for detecting pressure. And the bottommost layer of the skin is the hypodermis. A good way to identify the hypodermis is to look for adipose tissue. So these yellow structures here are supposed to represent adipose tissue, and adipose tissue is just fat. So you're gonna have adipose, and you also have areolar connective tissue. in this layer. So those were the basic layers of the skin. Now let's go ahead and talk about glands. You're gonna have two different kinds of sweat glands here in this picture. This is the merocrine or eccrine is another name. This one is, of course, they look similar, but merocrine is going to be much smaller. Another name is eccrine. You could find this type of sweat gland all over the body. It produces non-odorous sweat. It doesn't release any type of pheromone. And they're activated basically from the time that you're born. Now, this is an apocrine gland. These are the type of glands that become activated after puberty. They do release pheromones and they produce odorous sweat. And you find them only in certain regions of the body, like the axillary region, the inguinal region, for men around the facial area. So something to pay attention to here is that I didn't draw apocrine here in thick skin because this type of gland doesn't exist in thick skin. It only exists in thin skin. However, merocrine or eccrine exists both in thick skin and in thin skin. Let's see. So if we look at the hair follicle here, so this is the hair, and follicle, of course, is the sac that contains the hair. I'm not going to go into detail with the hair, but I do want to talk a little bit about the gland here that is attached to the hair follicle and also the muscle. So this gland here is the sebaceous gland. And what it does is that it produces a waxy, oily substance called the sebum. Also, attached to the hair follicle, you could see this muscle right here. This is the erector pili muscle. And when you get goosebumps, this is the muscle that contracts, causing the hair to stand up. So I'm going to label this. I believe the spelling is correct. Okay, and these are all the basic structures and layers for the skin.